Welcome to Altered Mates, a philosophical podcast hosted by Alejandro Tuama and Tobias Penno, two mates fascinated by altered states. Stay tuned for a conversational journey through the murky depths of consciousness, psyche, and the human experience. To find out more or to support the podcast, please go to alteredmates.com. We hope you enjoy the ride.
Hello there listeners, Alejandro Tuama here. Thanks for joining me and my mate in altered states, Tobias Penno. If you're new around here, then I should probably mention that this is the second episode in a two-part series on our experiences and understandings of the Internal Family Systems Model, or IFS Model, of mind. If you haven't listened to the first episode yet, then I do recommend you stopping there first. This episode, the second in the series, begins with Tobias delving deeper into the nuances of the IFS model, including some of the history of its development and some of its applications in therapy. Dr. T, as he likes to be known, also unpacks some wisdom on the groups or parts in the IFS model. And the discussion develops from there, and we touch on a wide range of topics from soul retrieval, the unconscious and the conscious, the personified emotions in the film Inside Out, big self energy, loving awareness, and the implications of the IFS model for our understanding of the self and the divine. Towards the later stages of the episode, I share some rather intimate and rather personal details from my IFS therapy session, the one that I did with none other than Altered Mates' very own Tobias Dr. T. Penno. What turned up for me in the session was a host of interesting characters, including a rather muscular gentleman pushing against a wall in a cave with no shirt on, and his opposite, a fat slob eating burgers on the couch. Plus there was a sinister fog that descends to help protect me, or perhaps detach me from the world. Oh yeah, and also a Luciferian goth kid. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the show.
So this recording is like a touch in on what is the IFS model, Internal Family Systems.
The context being that we both did some sessions with a therapist, with IFS. We've recorded our discussions before that first session, and then we did a debrief after my first session. And now we're thinking that it'd be useful to just look at the model as a whole and then potentially use our experiences to colour the different components of the model.
Yep. Well, and you've just done a session today.
Yeah.
So that's fresh.
So you held that one for me. That was the first time we've done a session together.
That was interesting. Mates doing IFS with each other.
Yeah. Real mates.
It really speaks to the name of our podcast, Altered Mates. Because, you go into an altered state when you do IFS, if you do it well, I think.
Yeah. And, that might be a good place to start. That, I think I talked about this in a previous recording, was that my concern or my challenge is getting into that altered state. So it's like I really seek out as a therapeutic tool that the altered state of like getting out of, I think you call it, what's the default mode?
Oh yeah, the default mode network, the high highly abstracted sense of self, the mind, that kind of habitual ruminatory kind of self that is awesome.
Yeah.
But usually doesn't have much insight into the deeper layers of why you do the things that you do, and who you are, and etc.
And I think it was like part of my reluctance for doing therapy as a younger person was the only kind of therapy I had an awareness of and even knew about is talk therapy.
Yeah.
And I had enough awareness to know that, or at least for me, I didn't think that was going to be useful, because I was like, I can talk forever, and what are these guys going to tell me, or what am I going to say that's going to be useful? And so I just didn't do it.
Yeah. You're smart, you're a smart cunt, and you're a writer. You've already got a really strong conceptualization of what's going on in your life and yourself.
Yeah.
But so what you need, which is I think the same thing as what I need, is something that can crack underneath those layers.
Yep.
And psychedelics was the first tool that I found that did that.
Same.
But then once I'd cracked myself open, then it was like, oh, now I can do all of these other things.
Yeah.
Breathwork, meditation, IFS, or anything like that is now suddenly open to me, and I can get something out of it.
So my concern leading into the IFS was that I wouldn't be able to get into that altered state.
Yeah.
And it actually did come up today in our session.
Yep.
And it came up in my second session with the other therapist.
Yep.
In the first session, I think maybe because I was going in so naive, I went pretty quickly into the state where I could access the different selves, or into the unconscious or whatever. The second session, I found I was pushing a lot. I was trying to get in there. I really enjoyed the first session, so I wanted to try to replicate it in the second session, and found I was frustrated. And then again today, when we started talking, when we started going into the session, I was expressing that I was feeling frustrated that I wasn't getting there.
Yeah.
But that in time, that dropped away.
Yep. And I think we just kind of used that frustration as the starting point, and probably not because we did that, but mainly because just sufficient time passed where you were lying down on your back,
maybe
on a comfy sofa with a blindfold on, that you eventually kind of entered enough of a trance, and then you were in the symbolic world of your inner landscape, which is what you want to do with IFS. Maybe we should explain the model.
Yeah.
So
you go.
Internal family systems. It's been around for a while now, and it was kind of founded by Dick Schwartz. And I think, and essentially IFS, it kind of originated from his work and his knowledge of family systems therapy. And
like actual families, mums and dads and kids and...
Yeah, yeah. So often, you might be working, for example, let's say you're working with a teen or a kid, 12-year-old, and this child is having some behavioral and emotional problems, right? And the idea of family systems is that instead of just focusing 100% on the individual and their particular psychological makeup and why they're responding, you suddenly zoom out and you look at the whole family system. And what you often find is that the child's problems are a manifestation of the system.
Yes.
And sometimes the kid is just a scapegoat for other issues in the family that are not addressed. And so they're actually just their problems are kind of downstream of something more central. Something simple could just be mum and dad have conflict. They're fighting, and the kids are picking up on that. They're feeling that. Their nervous systems are super sensitive to that, and their behavioral problems are downstream of that conflict. And so, you might look to the kid and go, well, if we change something in the child, then the problem will get fixed.
Yeah.
But often that's not true, and maybe you need to change something somewhere else in the system. Maybe it's one of the siblings, and something that's going on for them. And once you change that other thing, then the kid that originally came to you doesn't have their problems anymore.
Yeah.
And so that's the kind of theory of family systems. And what Dick did was took that and applied it to the individual self. You know, we've known, I think, for a long time that there is a multiplicity of self, that we have different aspects or parts that exist within us. And you know, there are therapies that work with that already. I think there's one called voice dialogue or something like that. And, you know, I don't know to what extent those other theories have a conceptualization of the parts that live within us as being like genuinely alive. And I think IFS definitely has that kind of notion that these parts are aspects of the self that carry their own agendas, their own sets of memories and feelings and thoughts and narratives. So I'm not sure whether IFS is unique in that sense, but definitely where it is unique is that it emphasizes the relational dynamics between those parts in exactly the same way that family systems theory emphasizes the relational dynamics between the family members. And the other thing that I think makes IFS unique is the existence of a self. So an aspect of you that is calm, compassionate, curious, open, and is kind of like a deep self, almost like the capital S self in lots of spiritual sort of communities. The part of you that some people say is connected to God, or this central part that is kind of like the conductor of the orchestra or the captain of the ship, who is has the kind of inner healing intelligence to heal the system. And so a lot of the work of IFS is about developing relationship between self and parts.
Can thinking about the parts, so I think that's one area that opens itself up to like criticism, like is that real? But I found what is helpful for me to think about that model is to think about like our biology. So I think about like my heart, my lungs, my stomach as parts of the whole, and that they each have like their own role and agenda and that kind of thing. Like they're doing their own thing. My heart knows what its job is and it's just doing it. And so the heart is both like me, but it's also a separate part of me, almost running, well, in many senses it is running kind of autonomously. And so then I think about like these parts of the self, because that might be difficult to think of. It's like, well, is that really a thing? Is there such a thing as different parts of the self? Or maybe it's almost like projections or images of different parts. Oh, now I'm getting excited. Like, could they be a projection of a biological structure, projected into an imaginal space, and then I think we might have talked about this before. I'm not sure about that. That's perhaps how different parts of the body might communicate with each other, is in these projections.
Oh right, yeah.
You know, like
that you can actually start to have a dialogue with the unconscious mechanisms that exist in your body, that control the different organs and things like that. That you can actually start to make contact with how your nervous system regulates those systems, because your brain's hooked up to that, right? So in theory, maybe you can have a bidirectional communication between your conscious self and your unconscious sort of body parts through the language of images. Yeah, and maybe that's an aspect of IFS that is implicit in the way that it works. And then on top of that, there's also the different structures that exist within the brain and nervous system that also have different functions.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, that if we think of like one idea I've heard is like that the mind is a projection of the brain / brain nervous system. And just in the same way that I can think of my heart and lungs being separate autonomous entities or structures, that the structures in my brain I can also consider as separate autonomous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
different modes as well. I mean, I think in the brain it's much less discrete entities like the heart, the liver. It's more like the neural kind of network is going to operate in this synchronization or this harmonic frequency versus that harmonic frequency, and these different modes are kind of different parts of yourself. And I think, you know, just a simple example is like, you know, when the nervous system goes into fight, flight, freeze, friend, or subtle forms of contraction and defensive, you know, posturing. That's probably protector parts coming online, right?
Yeah.
For me, I have strong flight tendency, so I kind of like, for me, that can look like me checking out a bit sometimes, or avoiding things, or, you know, and I think that sometimes that's a completely unconscious process. So if I get triggered in the moment, then subtly I might start to disconnect and move away from that situation, both mentally and eventually physically too. And in that situation, you know, there's a kind of usually unconscious drive to get away from that situation. And so that's probably a part of me blended with me. And we'll get to blending. Actually, maybe we should explain what blending is.
Well, I want to touch on a couple of things before we get there.
Yeah.
So I just had a thought that it's that kind of what's going on is, or what might be useful to think of as a personification. So that it's like what we might be doing is a personification of a process. So you talk about the fight, flight, freeze, friend process mechanism. That if we're almost thinking about that as a thing, as an entity.
I think actually what you're highlighting for me is that my trying to categorize IFS parts through nervous system modes is actually it's not correct. I dare say, and I am personifying those processes, but that's not what IFS does.
Okay.
I don't think, but I do think that there are. So what I would say is that, so first of all, there are those three main kind of categories of parts that IFS delineates. One is protectors. Managers, who are a type of protector, firefighters, who are another type of protector, and exiles. Managers kind of, you know, prepare us and manage us in a way that protects us from harm in the future. Firefighters put out a fire when we're, you know, something comes up in the moment, quite reactive response. And then exiles are, you know, like inner children, parts of us that have been perhaps exiled or it's no longer safe for them to express because of trauma. And rather than thinking of, say, you know, the flight response or the fight response as being the manifestation of a part, I would say that it's a bodily process that a part recruits to do its job.
Okay.
So this is something that Susan McConnell, the founder of somatic IFS, says, which I quite like, is that protector parts, you know that you're in contact with a protector part because it uses the body to do its job. Whereas you know that you're in contact with an exiled part because it uses the body to tell its story. And that's like a little kind of, I'm sure it's not a hard and fast rule, but a little guide to let you know who you might be talking to. And so I guess the long-winded point that I'm making is that a part is kind of on a hierarchical level, one step further back or meta than the bodily process of a fight, flight, freeze, friend.
Okay.
It is a sort of, I guess it is kind of like a sub-self.
Yeah.
With its own memories, with its own agenda, with its own intention, and so it will recruit the fight response in order to do a particular job in your life of protecting you, for example. So I think it's a bit more meta than that. But and I guess this is right at the frontier of the studies of consciousness. Like what is that actually? Yeah. What's the correlates of that in the brain?
Well, I think It's almost, well, it might be worth, one of the assumptions baked into this is the idea of the conscious and the unconscious.
Yeah.
It's like a fundamental assumption, really. Is it worth us touching on what is the conscious and what is unconscious?
Well, I think that what we are doing in the process of IFS, I mean, like one of the most important, or one of the really important parts of IFS is, and this is where, I think this is worth mentioning, is that like one of the central processes is quite similar to the shamanic model of soul retrieval, right? Where it's like, okay, we've developed these protectors, and the protectors are protecting the exiles, typically. That's their function. Something painful happened, and in order to prevent that from happening again, we develop a persona or a part that works to make sure that doesn't repeat itself. And often that part of that process of protection is to exile the part that led to the harm in the first place. So, I mean, what's a concrete example that we can give of a inner child that you might carry who, maybe you were cheeky as a child, but you had a dad who didn't like that and got angry, sometimes when you were cheeky. So you just put that part of you away, exiled it. It's not safe to be playful.
Sure.
Or even like sadness. Like sometimes when you're in a home environment where both parents are super stressed out, and you cry, and the parents get angry at you for crying.
Yeah.
Or just being like a Australian male, right? Like, boys don't cry. Don't be a pussy. Yeah. That's the messaging we get. So we exile the part of us that would experience sadness and cry.
Yeah. So perhaps I can think about in these sessions the exiles that I've encountered.
Yeah.
I would suggest that in the first session, the young blonde-haired little boy with the towel that he was chewing is an exile.
Yeah.
And it seems as though that it was at the time when my parents were getting divorced. And I don't know, there was some shit going on at school as well. I don't know, I was having learning problems.
Yep.
And for some reason or other, this little kid, I think he's like just like a nice, sensitive boy, is cast aside and forgotten.
Yes.
I don't know by what process or who the protector was.
But you recognised an exile there. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So using that, I just want to finish the train of thought around unconscious versus conscious and soul retrieval. And so the idea here is that one of the central processes of IFS is that we're kind of developing the relationship of self with exile, and perhaps unburdening the exile. So if the exile is carrying pain or trauma or grief, then to provide them with an opportunity to be heard and seen in that, to be witnessed in that, and to release that. And often that's done through fire, earth, wind, or water.
Sure.
So IFS has got a bit of shamanism kind of thrown in there. And so that there's that process of unburdening the exile, and then usually what comes after the unburdening is a retrieval or a reconnection between self and the exiled part. So you bring this inner child back into the fold of your life. And to me, that mirrors the process of soul retrieval in shamanic ideas.
Yep.
And so, often it's like, even just acknowledging that inner child is there and exists is already, powerful for people. I had a client recently who I was working with who encountered a young part of them, and in one of the first sessions, the way they encountered it was this little girl curled up in a ball in the fetal position in a pitch black room, scared, And, you know, over time, by the end of it, she was this beautiful little girl that just wanted to hold her hand, and she would take her hand and take her for a walk in the forest and things like that. And for this person, that was, you know, a process of reconnecting with this kind of joyous and free of worries part of herself that was innocent and pure, and that was part of her healing journey.
I resonate, with my little blonde boy.
Yeah.
With that it's kind of a sense of purity. That this little guy doesn't have anything to say. And when I first encountered him, he was alone, holding the chew towel in the middle of the oval, and the only transformation is that now I just like kind of hold him, or he like sits in my lap.
Yeah. So bringing this to the conscious unconscious thing, I think what you're doing there, or what we're doing here, is because you're entering into this meditation where you've got your blindfold on and you're having actual like imagery pop up of this young boy. I think that is in the same way that that dreams are kind of considered a manifestation of your unconscious. This spontaneous imagery of this young blonde-haired boy and what he looks like and how you feel towards him are all expressions of your unconscious. And you couldn't have got there through, you know, careful analytical self-reflection of writing. It needed to be this altered state, and in that way I think IFS mirrors the process of psychedelics a little bit, or any therapy that takes you into an altered state mirrors that process with psychedelics, or should I say psychedelics mirror those processes, or catalyzes them, probably is a better word.
Just moving into the world of images.
And so that information, I think, that you have of that boy is coming from your unconscious. I mean, I think your inner children are kind of like, they are essentially the unconscious, or they are a large part of the realm of the unconscious. Yeah,
the stuff that I'm not aware of in day-to-day life. Because there's too much to be aware of.
But which drives your behaviour in significant ways. Okay.
I think one other thing, I just wanted to look at the self, the idea of the self, and I think it's potentially a little bit confusing, like for me, where we have the self, I'm doing quotation marks, and then parts of the self in quotation marks. And that it... because when I think of the self, I think of the whole thing, but I know that in this model, the self is like the thing at the core, and if I might just pull in inside out, which is not a perfect model of it, but we were talking about like joy being kind of like the self, the captain of that ship.
Yes.
Whereas if joy is the captain of the ship, and it is almost, it's like a captain of a spaceship up there. And all the others are like parts. What's the whole thing?
Well,
so what's joy plus anger plus disgust plus...
Well, I think just off the cuff, I think first of all, I think Inside Out is great, you know, because like even though each of those guys and those characters like anger and disgust, they represent emotions, central emotions.
They're personified emotions.
It's a little bit different. So it makes it more like IFS because of that. Because IFS doesn't, you know, the parts are not just emotions. They have personalities. But in that show, these emotions have personalities, and they have their own repertoire of memories as well. Like, you know, sadness, when she has a sad memory, it's a blue ball that goes into the... and so in that way, it is quite like IFS. And I think probably more correctly to think about it would not be that joy is self, but joy is a part that has a lot of self-energy in her. And this is where I think IFS, you know, the language... often that's used is self-energy rather than self. Big
self-energy.
Yeah, like you're in self-energy. You can tell that you're in self-energy because of those feelings of being curious, compassionate, calm. There's usually these 8 C's that the IFS model uses to help you do a bit of a litmus test as to whether you're in self-energy or not.
Mm-hmm.
And the classic question, if let's say you're in the middle of a session with someone and you've encountered a part with them and you want to know, are they in self-energy or not? You just ask this question: how do you feel towards that part?
Mm-hmm.
And if the response is like, I feel frustrated, or I feel so sad, whatever it is, if it's this negative emotion, that's probably a sign that the person is not in self-energy. But if they're like, I feel compassion for this little guy or girl, or love, or I'm curious to know why they're like this, then it's usually a safe sign that you're in self-energy.
So if Inside Out were to be like redone to incorporate the IFS more directly, so it's like the self is actually missing from Inside Out, or we just don't see it,
or maybe the self
film
is not so definable as to be a personified part, and therefore wouldn't actually be a character in the film. I'm not sure. How you would break this down.
It's almost like it's like we the self is like God. It's kind of like we can't see it.
Yeah.
Is that what it's like? That's.
I guess, I don't know actually. This is a question for somebody more advanced on the IFS journey than me. I'm not a wholesale IFS guy. But yeah, I guess it's one of my favorite things about the model is that it carries and I think that this assertion that a self exists is, I don't know that's really like a scientific thing, but I think it's actually an intervention in and of itself, because it requires that the therapist that you work with, or the person that you work with, has an implicit trust in you, and a trust that you have what you need within your system to heal. You might need some guidance and things like that, but it's not actually me, the therapist, that's providing the healing. It's you unto yourself through your contact with this self. And I think of like Buddhism I think is a great place to go to, where that concept is pretty well accepted in those kinds of Eastern traditions. In Hinduism, the self is, there's like the Godhead, and God is kind of playing a drama with him or herself, and you are just pretending like you don't know that you're God. And Alan Watts talks about this actually, that the job of the guru, which he often says is the best correlate for Eastern traditions of psychotherapy, that the guru's job is to help the person to remember that they are God, just playing a game of hide and seek with him or herself, and sort of like imagines this moment of a guru sitting with a student, and the guru is sitting there looking at the student, and they can see that they're God.
I see.
They see it. And so their job is to sit there and be like, I see you, Shiva. I see you. And through that trusting and that knowing, it will, elicit that awareness in the other. And that's very similar, I think, kind of process to what we're talking about with IFS, where there's a trust that somewhere in there, you have self.
Is the self.
You've got this. We've got to make contact with that. Yeah.
I mean, it's opening up ideas that I don't know if we can get to it, but it's that is it that like the self is the one thing that you can't look at? So like, the self can look at all these other parts, look at the protectors and the exiles, but what then would be able to look at the self?
What happens when you turn like the self is the spotlight, or the light behind the
it's the one thing that is like Yeah, it's the source of the light.
Yeah,
but then that begs the question then, so that is the divine then, isn't it? That, yeah, potentially that's what the self is this divine spark, this the piece of God that's within everyone and everything, and it can shine out onto everything else.
That's it.
To illuminate them.
That's it. That's what they say, that you are loving awareness, and that when you turn that awareness onto itself, that's the essential path to enlightenment, basically.
Oh, that's that's Satori, like that's
Satori, yeah.
Moment of enlightenment is, yeah, when you turn the light on itself.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. There's a funny limerick that Alan Watts wrote about this, and it's like, there was a young boy who
Find it.
I'll find it.
Find it.
Yeah, I'll find it and share it a little bit later.
Okay.
But for now, where are we up to? I wanted to say something about psychedelics here. There was, I guess, this notion, I think what psychedelics do is they amplify your capacity to go into the unconscious and to go into these landscapes of imagery of different parts and memories that are emotionally salient and things like that, and that there is this idea, I think that's something that I'm grappling with right now, is that essentially, like, the arc of healing is common. There is a common arc of healing, I should say, and that it is essentially bringing compassion, bringing a compassionate presence to yourself and to different parts or different memories or different, and that's the essence of it. The ground of healing is just bringing that compassionate awareness onto yourself in different places. And that when you take a high dose psychedelic, that you know, one of the things that it can do, it can drop you into different places. It can drop you into the emotion of a part of yourself that may be suppressed, or it can drop you into the perspective of a part that was hurt, and in a child, and like, it can drop you into all these different places, and that what you want to do in psychedelic healing is to support somebody to lean into that and eventually come into a place of self where you are compassionately witnessing that part that's carrying the grief or pain or trauma, and that's the ground of healing, as a sort of general principle.
When I think about psychedelics and this process, one way I think about it is like, so when we do IFS therapy together, I have a play between my conscious and unconscious. And so I am trying to soften the conscious so that I can get into the unconscious, so that I can get into that imaginal world and check in with it, see what's going on. But I can, at any time, I can check out and I can say, nope, I've had enough.
Yep.
I don't want to do it.
Yeah.
Or my conscious can pull me out or whatever. But with psychedelics, that can become very difficult or impossible for the conscious mind to pull me out. And it's like, no, you're not getting out. You're not. And so sometimes it feels like I'll never get out. Yeah, and sometimes it just feels like I won't get out until I am ready, until I have done whatever needs to be done, seen whatever I need to see, or something like that.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, when you do an IFS process, the level of consent is significantly higher in your inner system, and that's something that IFS really emphasizes, is that you seek consent from the whole system before you go anywhere. But psychedelics seem to
Well, it's like you give consent once at the start,
Yeah.
and you give it for everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas, with any kind of therapy, because it's similarly with breath work that I've done, like holotropic breath work.
Yeah.
I was in an altered state, but it feels like at any moment I can stop this.
Yeah.
But I choose not to. And with the IFS, at any moment I can say that's enough.
Yep.
But I'm still choosing to be there. But with the psychedelic, it's like even when I say I want to stop, it's like, well, that's not such an easy process.
I found the quote from
Oh, yeah.
Alan Watts. He said I think he wrote this, a limerick. There was a young man who said, though, it seems that I know, but what I would like to see is the eye that knows me when I know that I know that I know.
Yeah.
So I think it's just illustrating that problem of like who is the witness?
Yeah.
Who is it?
Who is this I that you speak of?
Yeah.
Can you point to it, please?
Yeah. So, that's self, I guess. Or I guess maybe more like that's the discussion of the ambiguity of self.
Attempting self.
So let's take this into your experience just now this morning. I mean, do you feel complete explaining the model? Should we kind of do a wrap-up summary of what is internal family systems?
Maybe going into my experience will help.
Okay.
I don't know, maybe it'll actually muddy it, but because but we can talk about what I encountered today and then see how that tracks.
Yep.
It was frustrating at the start. But then, that's right. Okay, so I got to one character who was this underground worker, and so he was in a mine. He wasn't actually doing any mining, but he was just in a mine, underground cavern, and he's pushing against a solid stone wall. He had like work pants, work boots on, no shirt, and it was like pretty muscly. But he was just pushing this wall. We got to there because I said I was experiencing frustration. Wanted to go into the frustration. I feel it sometimes in a day-to-day, on a daily, and then on like a where my life is going kind of basis.
Yeah. So
when we dug into that was the image that came up of this guy pushing against a wall.
And we kind of like, there was the frustration of the session and like not feeling like anything was available.
Yeah.
Which then became the frustration of life and
not
like
moving in the ways that I want it to move, or not moving as fast, or feeling like it's, one step forward, two step back, that kind of frustration.
Yep. And then we met this dude.
Yeah. And then said, so look, what happens if you stop pushing that fucking wall?
Mm.
And then he's like, well, then I'd turn into the slob. And then it's this kind of like sluggy, I just picture myself like lying on the couch, like shitty beard growing out, like, and fat, just this like gross kind of belly, eating burgers and watching TV and just doing fuck all. That this guy feels like if he stops pushing, then that's what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then so he, and that's right. I know I think I was at this point inquiring because I was curious. Like I think maybe wanting to get this guy to clarify why he was afraid of becoming a slob. Where did that fear originate from? And I was curious as I was sitting there asking that, whether there was maybe a parent who consciously or unconsciously conveyed this message that it's important to be fit and healthy and strong, or perhaps conveyed the message that being fat or lazy and not exercising, or and not looking after your body is gross or icky in some way. And I was wondering if I was trying to find if there was an origin to this fear. And I think we landed on you being 18 or close to 18.
Something like that, yeah. So I don't know whether it was somebody else. I mean, there may well be something that came even earlier. But I recalled experiencing a time when I was just tipping over into that. It's when I was smoking a lot of weed, and it was kind of checking out of life, and felt myself putting on weight. Binge drinking, smoking weed all the time, checking out basically. And so I think this guy is afraid of that happening again, or of that it's like, can see that as a potential future for me, and just really doesn't want that to happen.
Yeah.
And so he's like, well, I push so that doesn't happen.
Yeah. And I remember at that point, I kind of just, I kind of went, well, either there isn't really anything further back that's significant because it didn't arrive, or, your unconscious is not ready to process whatever that was.
Yeah.
I mean, with something like that, my assumption is that just living in this society is enough to create a massive pressure to feel that way, and to feel icky about being slobbish, and to feel you don't want that.
But I think also it's one of those ones where it's like, it actually is unhealthy to live like that.
Well, yeah, and that too. And maybe there's even a more primal desire
like
to
a self-preservation of like, if you live like that, then you're going to die.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, everyone's going to die, but I mean, you'll
die soon.
Yeah, you'll die soon.
You won't be able to fight off the tiger compared to the other guys that are fit.
Yeah.
You're going to be the slowest one who gets preyed on.
Yeah.
Quicker.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then, that may well be the case in the past, and now in the present, it's like, well, you might not be able to fight off the cancer that you develop.
As
a result of living an unhealthy lifestyle.
Yeah. In which case, the root of the fear is really the fear of death.
Yeah.
Which, probably arguably most fear kind of originates from the fear of death, or the fear of
pain,
not procreating. Fear of abandonment.
So what's the fear of procreating?
No, the fear of not procreating.
No, I know. I'm saying, what about the fear of procreating?
Oh, well, that's a confusing.
That's something else.
That's a I mean, that's.
That's something else to unpack.
That's a whole other thing.
I think maybe also. So I was thinking about, is that guy then, can we consider that guy as an exile?
The guy that's pushing?
Yeah.
No, protector, it seems, I think.
Oh, so he's like, as long as I keep working for safety.
Yeah. And maybe he's protecting, maybe there is some exiles in your system who have experienced shame around not being productive or not being a certain way, and so maybe he does protect some exiles.
That makes sense.
Yeah,
and then we were kind of getting to the like, why is he in the cave? Can he be doing like what would happen then if he was to work differently? I can't remember how he got there, but eventually he's out of the cave, up on a field and in the sunshine, and like he's looking nice and fit and stuff like that, and he's just ready to work. It's like, how can I use that anger or frustration and direct it in a more productive means? So instead of feeling this sense that I just must push, it's like transforming that into using all that energy for something constructive that's not just purely pushing against a wall to stop myself from becoming a slob.
That's right, yeah. He sort of became more like a teammate, and you and him formed a better bond, and now you've got this useful litmus test for yourself. Of like,
am I in the cave or am I in the field?
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah. And then we went on to a sort of secondary protector afterwards, which seemed like slightly, like if this was superficial, I think the next one was a slightly deeper layer that we started to work with.
This is a fog.
The fog.
Yeah, who I encountered a fog in the second session, but it seemed that fog seemed, I was like, it's a nice fog, I think.
Yeah.
It's like something that'll surround me and help my body feel calmer and relaxed. And in this session, I feel like it's like, this is probably the same fog.
Yeah.
But I see the more sinister side of it, that it's something that comes in to help me detach from the world, to help, and protect me from everything.
Yes, and I think this was my imagery, which is kind of like stepping outside of the zone of being a therapist, but because we're mates, I told you, I said that in my imagination, I saw that fog, because you brought up the moment that your parents divorced.
Yeah.
And so I had this image of the fog suddenly transforming into a big cozy blanket that wrapped around you in that time.
Yeah. The image I had was of an avalanche that at first it's like that, and it just kind of flows down, and then the fog is just all around. Yeah, and looking at how that protects me from, potentially feeling the pain and confusion of my parents' divorce, but also all the other things going on in childhood at the time, where I feel like I had a lot of communication problems, couldn't connect with people, and that fog just, or whether it contributed to that probably, and also helped me deal with it. It was there. Yeah, because one of the things I said to you, I think in the session, was that it sort of sounds like the fog is the subjective experience of a dorsal vagal shutdown. So the parasympathetic arm of the nervous system, which is responsible for kind of like shutting down and dissociating and freezing up, is it can come online in situations where a child's nervous system is overwhelmed by something like parents splitting and that kind of thing. And when you're in a dorsal vagal, it's kind of like the opposite of that, I guess. So an oversimplification is the ventral vagal, which is the arm of the nervous system that is also parasympathetic but responsible for social engagement. And so like it innervates, your eyes, your face, your throat, your vocal cords and things like that. And so it's responsible for all of that really quick, unconscious, interpersonal communication that's going on, not language based, underneath the language. And so if you're stuck in a kind of dorsal vagal shutdown, then social connection is going to be hard. Yeah.
Real tough. So it could have been maybe that fed that.
Well, it's really interesting. I wanted like perhaps downplay the divorce as like the moment. I think it's more just like the overwhelm of just existence, and that for whatever reason, and maybe eventually I'll find the nugget or something like that this was just difficult for me from a young age, of that interpersonal connection. Whether it is because the fog descended at some stage or the fog descended because of it, I'm not not sure, but something happened like that. It's and it's made it really hard. But then I now I'm thinking of like these depressive episodes that I entered into throughout my childhood. It was like the primary reason, or one of the primary reasons for me seeking out psychedelics in the first place, was to try to put a stop to the depressive episodes. That's like, what the fuck? But when we were doing the session, I had this moment of reconnecting with the feeling of stepping outside of the fog and seeing what is possible in the world, like for me and then for the world itself. And I felt the sense of like when I go into the fog, it's saying no to life.
Yeah.
That it's a nihilism. It's saying like it's not worth it. The world's a bad place. I don't want to be here.
Yeah.
I want to die.
Yeah.
And this is a way that I can softly, slowly die. And peeking out of the fog and into the sunshine is saying yes to life. And it's scary and it's unknown and it's potentially painful, but it has all the other things as well. It has all of the joy and beauty.
Yes. Yeah. And that's when we connected with a part of you, a visionary part of you.
Yeah, that's right. Well, there was a calling from the parts for a clearer vision.
That's right.
They were saying like, because I have a vision for where I want to be and where I want to go, and I think to a certain extent that vision for the future contributes to my present feelings of sadness.
Yeah.
Because it's a striving for, it's not being content in the present, it's striving for something.
Yeah.
But so I think that yes, that is true, but to another extent it is a beautiful vision, and it's where I can see what my life can be if I just continue to say yes to life and accept it and do the things that I know are going to make me feel better.
Yes. And at this point I think we wrapped it up by sort of realizing that these were two parallel processes, both about seeing the other side, the contrapositive, so like the litmus test of the miner versus the guy up in the grass,
yes,
in the sunshine, and the same true of like, rather than focusing on trying to work out when you've entered the fog, focusing on whether you're connected to your vision or not.
Yeah, and that actually prevents the fog from descending in the first place.
Yeah.
Those are the things, that keep the fog away.
Yeah, very like a strength-based kind of way of approaching these two dynamics. And then we kind of got into, the same discussion that we just had about Inside Out earlier, right? Like, what is self? Because I think we were talking about the visionary part of you as maybe, is that self, or is that just a part that has right. lots of self-energy? And then we talked about your... that's right, because we were like, can we recruit the different parts to help you with your vision? And you brought up your like shadow or devil self. What does he look like?
I don't know. I'm almost reluctant to talk about him. But
yeah, okay. That's okay.
I'll admit. So he came up in the second session. This was the first time I encountered him. So this is with the other therapist when I was seeking the boy, the blonde, innocent, pure boy. And instead there was this little black-haired kid who's dressed kind of like a goth. And instantly I was like, oh, that's not me, because I've never had black hair in my life. And then realised that actually he was shape-shifting. That at one moment he was this little kid dressed in black who had a lot to say, whereas the young boy basically is mute, but he's just like lovely. This kid was like, hey, what's up? I got heaps of things I can do. But then also was like a fully grown man, like all in black. And then he can also become this gargoyle, this completely black dragon monster. And I'd encountered that before in a breathwork. And when I saw that, I realized then that this is not some little boy. This is like basically my dark side.
Shadow.
Yeah. I don't know whether... I don't like using the word shadow because I think there's a lot that's in the shadow. But I think that this guy... Well, I don't know. It's useful, but I think he's the dark side. He's the dark side of the Force. He's like Darth Vader.
Yeah, I guess we were talking about this at the end where we realised that because you were saying how something that you'd noticed from all your IFS sessions was that the different characters that you interacted with were changing and morphing so much, and you were wondering if there was a coherency to it.
And if I just keep doing sessions, will there continue to be more and more characters each time without any continuity?
Yeah. And what we landed on was that the characters that were really parts as per the IFS model would probably have some consistency. So like the part of you that has the fog as a protective mechanism, the exile, the innocent boy, that, you know, all of those are probably going to keep popping up in some shape or form. But that probably this what do you call him?
Well, so if I use a Christian lens, it's Lucifer.
Yeah.
So he's a fallen angel. Yeah, but it's also, so if I think of the self as divine energy, as God, then what Lucifer represents is like the human separate from God. That it's like, it's basically taking God's power and using it for your own will. And so that's why he'd been cast aside, because I was perhaps wanting to align with God's will.
Yes.
But then also realizing that, well, maybe this guy does have a role to play in my life. And that he's actually just the other side of the coin that is myself.
Yeah.
That's one way of looking at it. And I'm just thinking out loud now. Well, what else am I doing? But if like Christ and the devil are one side of the same coin, or to look at it like there is God, the divine light, and that Lucifer split from God and fell from God's grace, and so is actually separate and has his own power. Getting into regions now, I don't know whether I want to fully...
Well, we can pick that back up in demons and things like that. But I think the point is that this guy will probably constantly morph and change and present in different ways and have different characters, because this is not strictly a part as per IFS.
Right.
But
He's an archetype. Yeah.
Thanks for joining us. We hope you enjoyed the episode. For more episodes or to support the podcast, please follow the links in the show notes or go to altedmates.com. Adios, amigos!